All right, so I'm going to add to what we're using our T-square and our measuring tools for. We're going to talk about scaling up an image, what it means to grid it off, what it means to find the same proportion of the original image and then make that bigger on a piece of paper. This is the same information that allows you to take a 7-inch design and blow it up to 30 feet or 10 inches, okay? So I'm going to take this image. This is a piece by Seymour Schwast. We're going to take this, we're going to grid this off, and we're going to grid off this paper. We're going to make it 11 inches high now. So I'm going to show you how you're going to proportion this, how you're going to grid it, and I'll do it, and as I'm doing it, I'm going to talk you through it. But again, being able to go back and look at this, what it is I'm actually doing, I think will help you to do it. Sometimes the words get confusing. So, first thing is, I'm going to take my image, and again, you do not want to work on your original image. You want to make sure you have a copy of that so you can put a grid on this, and then a likewise grid on the sheet of paper or the painting that you're going to work on to scale it up, to make it bigger. All right, so again, right now what we're trying not to do is change the proportion or the relative width to height of this original image as you blow it up. One of the things that you want to make sure you do as a designer is it's much more efficient to design small and then to scale it up later, because it will save you from using materials and the time needed to experiment at a large scale. But once I have this design that I like, that I think is worthwhile to blow up, I don't want to make changes. I don't want to make design decisions after I've blown it up. I'm simply taking this and making it bigger. All right, so I'm going to quickly go ahead and do this. Two ways I can do it. I could use my T-square or my triangle. One of the things I'm going to show you is I will show you through the triangle and the T-square kind of simultaneously, and you can see what I'm talking about. So mine is already marked off as a rectangle, and now I'm going to lightly put, and again, because I want to show you how to do this, I'm using a pen. I would suggest you use a pencil to do this part. I'm going to go through the top left and bottom right of this image, right? Top left and bottom right of this image. I'm going to put then another diagonal that goes through the top right, bottom left again in this one, all right? And what that does, that X through any rectangle will find the halfway point, all right? So it's the exact center of this rectangle where these two lines overlap, as long as I went through these intersection points, okay? So once I have that, I can use my straight edge of my triangle to find the grid for this. So again, I'm going to line up my outside, and I'm going to go through this intersecting point in the middle, and I will put a perpendicular line to my side through that point. All right, so I would do the same for the height of this piece, lining that up using my triangle to go through that intersecting point. All right, so what I've just done is I've marked off this drawing into 4 quadrants, okay? So what I'm asking you to do is kind of forget the triangles that you have here, right? Because those are going to only help you to find the middle, and you're going to see this as 4 quadrants, 4 rectilinear spaces. The easier thing to do is to understand how these rectangles work. It gets kind of confusing when you start thinking of triangles. Again, the triangles here, if I'm doing this in pencil, I can do it really lightly because all I'm trying to do is find that center point, okay? So here's the cool thing. If I'm using my T-square, I can set up my T-square along these points, right? Remember, I have to use tape to make sure that I have that lined up. I'm going to tape this down. And now I can kind of zip through this by using my T-square to grid this off. All right, so remember, any diagonal lines that go from the lower left to the upper right, upper left to the bottom right, anytime I intersect that rectangle or divide that rectangle by using those diagonals, I can find the halfway point of that rectangle. So again, so you can see it, I'm going to simply put a diagonal line in this one quadrant. All right, so I'm dividing that up. You'll notice that I now have the X. I found that center point of that one quadrant. So here's the speedy part. I can go through this. I can bisect that line, and I can bisect this line. And I've divided this one quadrant into 4, okay? Now, what you probably don't know is where it intersected these lines, and because I'm using a t-square, I can now just go through these intersecting points, and I can basically finish dividing up each of these quadrants into 4 with those 3 diagonal lines that I've just made. 1, 2, 3. Let me show you what I mean. So I'm looking at this intersecting point, and I can draw my line all the way across here. I can see these 2 intersecting points. And I can draw my line across there. So by using those 3 lines, I can find all the quadrants here, right? I can divide each of those into 4. All right, I'm gonna continue along this line, and we're going to take this gridded image, and we're now going to make it bigger. We're gonna scale it up. So I know that my new size that I'm gonna work in is gonna be 11 inches high, right? I don't really know the width of this. I know that I wanna make it 11 inches high, and now I have to figure out how to find that proportion width, okay? So because we're artists and math doesn't come natural to many of us, I wanna show you how to do this visually, all right? So just as I was showing you how to do this gridded off, without actually dividing this using math, I use these diagonals to do it, okay? Those diagonals help me to find halfway points. I divide those halfway points using my tools to have perpendicular and parallel lines, right? I'm gonna do a very similar thing that's gonna help me to proportion this exactly to these proportions, but at a bigger scale, 11 inches high. So first thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure 11 inches high. And again, t-square or metal ruler. And I'm gonna mark off that 11 inches high. And again, I could use my metal ruler and a triangle to do this. In this case, I've already squared it up using my t-square. So now that is my territory that I'm gonna work in, okay? So it's 11 inches high. The next thing that I'm gonna do is I'm gonna position this, my drawing, and you'll notice what I've done is I've put extra lines here. I've carried that side line all the way down to the bottom of the paper and to the left of the paper. This allows me to line this up. I should have extended it the other way. Okay. So I'm gonna line this up in the lower left corner. And now all I have to do is extend this line, the lower left corner of my design, to the upper right edge of my design, and I'm gonna allow it to hit my 11-inch mark, okay? So I'm gonna allow that to go all the way up like this. Does that make sense? Okay? So I'm taking this midline of my original drawing and I'm extending that out into my 11-inch high piece of paper. And you'll notice that it doesn't quite, my line didn't quite go over here, so I'm going to show you how to do that. I'll extend that line out. So this now tells me the new width of my enlarged piece to match the proportion of this drawing. So I'm going to come over here using my t-square again, and I'm going to put that perpendicular line down. So this rectilinear area is the same proportion as this, but it is now 11 inches high. And I haven't had to use any math to figure that out. All right, so again, I've taken the liberty to get started gridding off this space. I've marked off the same proportion as the original design, but I've now scaled it up to 11 inches high, okay? So what I need to do then is grid this off the same way that I gridded this off. All right, and again, so I'm not in a sense thinking about math, how I can make an equation of like how big this is to this. I simply grid it off the same way by finding my halfway points, using my tools to then hit those intersecting points just like I did before, okay? So I use my 3 diagonals to find those halfway points of these rectangles, the big one and then the small one here. And then I use those intersecting points to continue to make my grid, all right? So I'm going to now finish that off. And you'll notice that the rule of thumb here is if they relatively look all the same size, then you're doing the right thing, okay? So relative same size. You would see if one's looking really wonky, really thin, really fat. So that's gonna help you to move forward. So the deal here now is that I have the same grid on both of these spaces. And ideally, I should be able to look at one of these shapes, one of these rectangles at a time, and draw that information over here. So if I do this upside down for you, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover up every rectangle but one at a time. Okay? So what I'm going to do is now look at this space and say, okay, so I'm going to have a line that comes about like this, and it's this, and this, and this. So this is my dark space. This is another dark space. This is where I have this curved line coming up. Okay. So basically what I'm trying to do is draw this information here. And what happens here is when I stop thinking about what the object is, and I simply look at the formal shapes, thin lines, thick lines, does it split the space in half? Is it curved? Is it straight? If I can look at the formal properties, I can record those formal properties over here. Once I've done this one by one, I can then come back and make sure that those spaces line up. So I would come back here and find out, oh yeah, the line needs to come across. Oh, and it's actually a straight line. So I come back in with my tool, like a triangle, and make sure that line goes across, okay? So this is a way to take any drawing, any design, and blow it up to a larger scale. This allows you to make sure that each one of these spaces is proportional to the overall piece. And so when you do finish the piece, it should look proportional to the original image. All right, so I gridded off this initial design, this preliminary design that I'm gonna blow up to this 11-inch height. I gridded off into 16 units, okay? So 8 on the bottom, 8 at the top, right? Now, to do this more accurately, the more gridding I do, the more I will be able to see the formal shapes and shape alone, not understanding necessarily what they're coming from. I don't have to have that conflict in my head. So there might be an area, I might get down to say this unit and go, okay, that's really complicated. I'm having a hard time understanding what I should do here. So one of the things that I would do is I would come back in here and I would only take this one and divide that like I've done before, right? Using my triangle and my T-square. And I would find my halfway points just like I've done before. And I can grid it off into 4 more units, okay? And I would do the same over here, and I'm gonna show you really quickly how, right? We're gonna divide that into 4 more units, all right? So now what I can do is I can pin that down to a smaller unit and say, okay, do I understand that one? Can I draw that into this unit, okay? The smaller it is, the simpler it is for you to understand that. If you say this is too complicated still, I could break this down into 4 more units, okay? So what will happen is if you're doing something like a portrait or a very complex landscape, you might have areas that become much more complex. And in doing so, you may have to slow down and do it in smaller increments to be able to create that accuracy.